When I first found the listing, I thought it had to be a scam. A one-bedroom apartment in the middle of the city for under $900 a month? Unheard of. No photos, just a line that read, "Cozy attic unit above bakery. Private entrance, cash preferred." But I was desperate. My last roommate had moved in with his boyfriend, and I couldn't afford the rent on my own. My lease was up in 2 weeks, and I'd already struck out on 5 places, either too expensive, too sketchy, or requiring a credit score that didn't look like it had been mauled by student loans and 2 years of freelance instability. So I called the number. A man answered, voice low and a little distracted, like I'd caught him in the middle of something. When I asked about the apartment, all he said was, "Come by before noon. If it feels right, you can take it." I didn't even get his name. The place was on a quiet street I'd never noticed before. Sandwiched between a laundromat and a closed-down record store, the bakery didn't have a flashy sign, just a faded painted window that read Marlowe's Bread. It looked quaint, like a place your grandma would still shop at. The upstairs entrance was around back, up a narrow wooden staircase. I hesitated at the door before knocking, unsure if I was supposed to. But before I could decide, the door opened, and there he was. I'm not great at remembering first impressions, but I remember this. He had flour on his forearm, his dark hair was still damp from a recent shower, and he looked like someone who didn't talk a lot unless it was worth saying. Not unfriendly, just self-contained, like all his energy was being saved for something better than small talk. "You, Eli?" I nodded. "Yeah." He stepped aside to let me in without another word. The apartment was small, like really small. Sloped ceilings, a single window overlooking the alley, and a kitchen that looked like it had seen better centuries. But it had wood floors, decent light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop an inch. "How much again?" I asked, turning to face him. He scratched at his beard, eyes flicking over my shoulder like he was mentally checking something off. $8.50, includes utilities, and there's bread." I blinked. "There's what?" He nodded toward the floor. "You'll smell it every morning. I start around 4 a.m. I laughed a little, unsure if that was a warning or a perk. "That a problem?" "No," I said. "That actually sounds kind of nice." He tilted his head. "You want it?" I looked around once more, heart pounding, in a way that had nothing to do with the apartment. Yeah, I do." I didn't sleep much that first night. Not because the apartment was noisy, though the creaking floorboards protested every movement, but because of the smell. Even through the thin walls, the scent of freshly baked bread seeped in like it had a purpose. Warm, yeasty, comforting. Somehow, it felt like home before I'd even unpacked. By 5 a.m., I gave up trying to stay in bed. I threw on a hoodie and padded down the narrow staircase, the smell already stronger, more alive, filling the hallway like it was breathing. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to see the baker yet, but curiosity pulled me forward. The bakery's door was cracked open, a soft glow spilling onto the alley. I poked my head in and froze. There he was, Tristan, moving like he owned the world yet didn't need anyone to notice. Rolling out dough, dusting flour over a work surface, shaping loaves with hands that were strong but careful. His back was to me, broad shoulders flexing with each motion, and I couldn't help staring, not just at him but at the way he moved. Deliberate, quiet, and strangely mesmerizing. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard me shift, giving a small, almost shy smile. "Morning," he said, voice low, calm. Morning," I replied, my own voice rougher than intended. I stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. The bakery smelled like heaven and nostalgia all at once. "You here for a loaf or just stalking the upstairs tenant?" he teased, flour flicking off his fingers like sparks. I laughed nervously. "Just curious. You start this early every day?" "Every day. 4 a.m. I like quiet mornings." His eyes flicked to mine, and for a second I thought he might be studying me instead of the dough. "You're adjusting okay upstairs?" "Yeah," I said, better than I expected. The words came out more honest than I intended. He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Good. That's good to hear. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask how long he'd been doing this, or why he seemed so impossibly calm with flower-covered arms, or why watching him knead bread made my chest tighten. But instead, I nodded, muttered something about checking the apartment, and turned to leave. He called after me. If you want, you can grab a fresh croissant before you go. It's not perfect, but it's good. I hesitated, then nodded again. When I turned back, he was smiling, just a hint, like he knew something I didn't yet. I accepted the croissant, warm in my hand, and left for my apartment, my heart still thumping faster than it should. By the time I settled on my tiny couch with coffee in one hand and the croissant in the other, I realized something terrifying and exciting. I was already thinking about him, not just noticing him, but wanting to see him, wanting to talk to him, wanting to know every little motion and quiet expression. And that was before I even knew his name. The next few days, I found myself waking earlier than I needed, not because of the bread, but because of him, Tristan. His name had slipped into my head, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. Every time I stepped into the bakery, the scent of flour and butter hit me first, and then there he was, moving, creating, quietly humming to himself. I never realized that watching someone do something they loved could be magnetic. One morning, I lingered near the counter, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I wasn't really paying attention to it. Tristan was shaping baguettes, flour dusting his forearms. The way his fingers pressed and folded the dough, it was precise, almost tender. I didn't know why I was holding my breath, but I was. He glanced up and caught me staring. Our eyes met, and he didn't look away immediately. Not right away. Instead, he offered me that small, crooked smile. The one that made my chest tighten. "You're really early again," he said, his voice soft like he was testing the words before they left his mouth. "I couldn't sleep," I said, and it sounded honest, more honest than I intended. He nodded slowly, resuming his work, but then, ever so subtly, he moved closer to the edge of the counter, the gap between us shrinking just a little. My stomach did that ridiculous, fluttery thing people wrote about in cheesy novels. "Want to try one?" he asked, holding out a croissant. My fingers brushed his as I took it. Just a touch, but it sent a spark up my arm I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Thanks," I murmured. The word felt inadequate, tiny against the strange intensity in the air. He laughed quietly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes, and shook his head. "You'll have to eat faster if you're going to keep coming early." I laughed too, but my voice caught. And suddenly I realized I wanted to keep coming early. Not for the bread, not even for the smell, but for him. Over the next week, it became routine. I'd wander down to the bakery first thing in the morning, linger under the pretense of buying pastries, sometimes sit at the little corner table pretending to read my emails while Tristan worked. And he noticed. I could see it in the way he'd glance at me from time to time, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips, a shift in his stance when I walked by. Then one morning, the bakery was quieter than usual. I stepped inside to find him kneeling on the floor, laughing quietly to himself at some small mess the dough had made. He looked up when I entered, eyes widening slightly at seeing me standing there. "Hey," I said softly, not sure why my voice trembled. "Hey," he replied, and for the first time, his tone held a warmth I could feel. He stood, brushing flour from his arms, but didn't move away from me. Not right away. Something in that pause, the quiet, the smell of flour, the early morning light spilling across the bakery floor, made my chest tighten. I realized I didn't want to move. Didn't want him to move. I began, then stopped. The words weren't coming. "Don't worry about it," he said, almost a whisper, and that small smile returned. "Just sit." I did. And for a long moment, we sat there in silence, the quiet broken only by the faint clatter of baking tools. But the silence wasn't empty. It was charged, electric. And I knew, in a way I didn't fully understand, that he felt it too. By the middle of the week, I couldn't deny it anymore. I was obsessed. Not just with the smell of the bakery, Not just with the bread, though that was part of it, but with Tristan. Every subtle gesture, every brush of his fingers against the dough, every quick glance that lingered a beat too long, made my stomach twist in ways I wasn't ready to admit. That morning, I lingered by the counter longer than usual. Tristan was shaping croissants, his hands moving with effortless precision, but I noticed small things I hadn't before. The way his jaw clenched slightly when he concentrated, the tiny crease between his brows when he measured dough, the little smudge of flour on the tip of his nose. I laughed softly to myself, because it wasn't just bread I wanted to watch him make. I wanted to be near him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. He caught me staring, again, and this time, he didn't smile immediately. Instead, he froze for just a second, eyes flicking from the dough to mine, and there it was, a spark, quick and electric, that made my pulse jump. "Stop watching me like that," he said softly, not harshly, more like he was teasing himself as much as me. I wasn't," I stammered, but the words were useless. My face warmed. He didn't answer, just reached for a fresh batch of flour-covered dough. His fingers brushed mine when handing it to me to set aside on the counter. The contact was brief, accidental maybe, but it left me shaking inside. I couldn't hide it. "Here," he murmured, eyes meeting mine, and I felt my heart hitch. "You're doing it wrong." I froze. "Doing what wrong?" "The folding," he said, but the corner of his lips tugged upward in that sly, crooked way I was starting to crave. "You're not gentle enough." Before I could think, I leaned closer, just to watch him demonstrate. His fingers were warm, dusted with flour, guiding mine over the dough. I wanted to touch him properly, to feel the strength in his hands, the way his body leaned close to mine. My breath caught. He pulled back slightly, a quiet laugh escaping him. "You're distracted." I swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. "I'm just learning," I muttered. "Uh-huh." His eyes gleamed, amusement and something else I couldn't name, mingling in that glance. "Keep at it then." We went back to folding dough, side by side, the tension thick, simmering. My shoulder brushed his when I reached for a tray. His arm didn't move away, not for a second. And I realized something that scared me more than I'd admit. I didn't want him to. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a tenant upstairs. I was part of his morning, part of the rhythm he'd built for himself. And that thought thrilled me, terrified me, made me ache all at once. When he finally straightened up, wiping flour from his hands, he looked at me, and the soft morning light caught the sharp lines of his face. He said nothing, just tilted his head, a small, private smile that felt like an invitation and a challenge all at once. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words got stuck. Instead, I just nodded, caught in the gravity of him, the bakery, the quiet intimacy we just created with hands and flour. And I knew, without a doubt, that my mornings would never be the same again. By the following week, my mornings had become almost ritualistic. I woke early, more than I needed to, and wandered downstairs to the bakery under the pretense of buying pastries. But really, I was just drawn to Tristan. The smell of dough and sugar, the warmth of the ovens, and the quiet intensity of him moving through his work had started to feel addictive. That morning, he was making cinnamon rolls. The sweet, spicy aroma filled the small bakery and made my stomach clench in a way I hadn't expected. He glanced up as I entered, giving that small, crooked smile I'd begun to crave more than coffee. "Here early again," he said, voice low, calm, teasing. "Can't sleep," I replied, shrugging. Thought I'd see how the morning looked from the bakery side. He tilted his head, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us, the smell of cinnamon thick in the air. Then, almost casually, he gestured toward the counter. "Sit. You're in my way otherwise." I froze. "Sit? With him?" My pulse skipped a beat as I carefully took the stool by the counter, close enough to see the way his hands moved, flour dusted across the knuckles, rolling dough with a rhythm I could have watched for hours. You're observant, he said softly, almost like a statement rather than a question. I notice things, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately, just kept working, kneading, rolling, brushing a little flour onto the edge of the counter. And when our fingers brushed as I reached for a mixing bowl, it wasn't accidental, not entirely. His hand lingered for a heartbeat longer than it should have, and my chest clenched in that familiar, overwhelming way. Careful, he murmured, not looking up, or you'll get distracted and ruin the dough. I think I'm already distracted, I said, surprising even myself. Finally, he looked up, eyes meeting mine, and there it was. The quiet intensity that had been building for days, the tension we hadn't yet named. He didn't say anything else. He just kept working, but the air between us vibrated, charged, waiting. When the last tray of cinnamon rolls went into the oven, he wiped his hands on his apron and leaned against the counter a little closer. You ever stay after hours? He asked casually. I hesitated. Not really. Why? Sometimes, he said slowly, almost teasing, it's nicer when it's quiet, fewer distractions. You could help me clean up, or just stay. My stomach flipped. Stay? With him? And somehow, my heart already knew that if I did, nothing between us would ever be simple again. I nodded, unable to find words, and he smiled, that little curve of his lips warm and private. Good, he said, and went back to the counter, letting me linger in the charged silence. It wasn't just the bread anymore. It wasn't just the smell of cinnamon. It was him. And I couldn't resist. The bakery was quiet, the city still half asleep outside the windows. The last tray of cinnamon rolls had cooled on the counter, their golden tops glistening in the morning light. I sat on the stool, watching Tristan move, the way his muscles flexed under the apron, the casual grace with which he carried trays to the shelves. Don't just sit there, he said softly, brushing flour from his hands. Grab a rag or something. Help me with the counters. I stood, fumbling slightly, aware of how close I was to him. Our arms brushed as I reached for the same rag, and this time there was no mistaking it. He lingered. Just a breath of a pause, but enough to make my chest tighten and my pulse hammer. You're still early, he murmured, voice low. I like mornings, I said, and realized my words sounded like a confession. Because they were. I liked this morning. Liked it because it meant I got to be near him. Tristan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me wipe down the surface. You're careful, he said, not as an observation, but as if he noticed everything about me. Every twitch of my fingers, the way I shifted my weight, how my eyes kept darting to him. I pay attention, I admitted, cheeks heating. A quiet laugh escaped him. Careful, or you'll distract me too. I froze. Distract you? His eyes met mine, intense, searching. Yeah, you're already doing it. And just like that, the space between us felt smaller, somehow warmer. The scent of cinnamon, flour, and freshly baked bread filled the air like a spell, intoxicating, impossible to resist. I wanted to reach out, wanted to touch him, not just brush flour off his arm, but actually connect. I swallowed hard, aware of every beat of my heart, every flutter in my chest. And then his hand brushed mine again, lightly at first, almost casual, but I could feel the intention behind it. His eyes flicked down at our hands, then back to mine, and he didn't pull away. Not yet. I started, but words failed me. You don't have to, he said softly, stepping a little closer. Just stay here. I nodded, almost stupidly, letting him guide the rag across the counter beside him, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that the smell of cinnamon and dough and him became overwhelming. And for a moment, the bakery wasn't just a place to bake bread. It was ours. Quiet, intimate, suspended in a bubble of early morning and unspoken tension. I didn't move away. I couldn't. Tristan glanced at me, that small, private smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You like it here, huh? I swallowed, heart hammering. Yeah, I like it. Good, he said, leaning just slightly closer. The smell of bread and cinnamon and him wrapped around me, heady and impossible to ignore. Because you're not going anywhere anytime soon. And in that moment, I didn't want to. Not for anything in the world. That night, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The city had gone to sleep, and the faint hum of ovens and cooling racks from below was all that connected me to Tristan. But I wasn't downstairs anymore. I was upstairs, lying on the small couch in the living room, thinking about him, about how his hands had brushed mine today, the way his voice had softened, the way his smile lingered in my mind long after it had vanished from the bakery floor. I wasn't sure when I drifted off, but I woke to the smell of bread again, this time mingled with something else. His cologne. Faint, warm, grounding. My heart jumped, and I realized that he must still be down there, tidying, finishing up for the day. A soft knock at my door made me freeze. Eli? His voice, low and husky, carried up the stairs. Yeah? I called back, my voice shaking more than I intended. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Flour on his forearms, still warm from the bakery, and eyes that seemed to see me in a way no one ever had. He didn't step inside immediately, just leaned against the frame, as if waiting for me to decide. I couldn't sleep, he said, and I realized that was probably the understatement of the century. You want to come in? I whispered, my own nerves betraying me. He nodded and stepped inside, moving slowly, deliberately, so close that I could feel his warmth even before he reached the couch. He sat beside me, just close enough that our legs brushed, but not enough to cross some invisible line, yet, for a long moment, we didn't speak. Just sat there, listening to the quiet, the faint creak of the building settling around us. And then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned just slightly closer. I like mornings, I said, voice barely above a whisper, but I think I like nights with you even more. His gaze flicked to mine, and there it was, that subtle smirk that made my chest tighten. Careful, he murmured. You're going to make me think you mean that. I do, I admitted, heart hammering. I mean it. That was all the invitation he needed. One hand brushed mine, lightly at first, tracing the back of my fingers with a tenderness that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. You feel different up here, he said, voice low. Like, closer. Somehow. I feel the same, I whispered, leaning slightly toward him. Closer. The silence stretched, thick and intimate, until the space between us dissolved. His fingers laced with mine, his body inching just a little closer, the warmth radiating from him like an electric current I couldn't resist. And then, softly, almost hesitantly, he pressed his lips to my temple. It was light, teasing, but it hit me like a spark. My heart raced, my stomach twisted, and suddenly the apartment upstairs didn't feel small anymore. It felt infinite. I've wanted to do that for days, he murmured, voice so low I barely caught it. Me too, I admitted, barely able to breathe. And just like that, the quiet charm of the baker downstairs became something impossibly real, intimate, and ours. No words were needed. Just the warmth, the touch, and the shared realization that nothing, no apartment, no schedule, no smell of bread, would ever feel quite the same again. We stayed like that for hours, hands entwined, hearts racing, listening to the bakery below and the city beyond, finally understanding that the room above the bakery came with far more than just rent. It came with him. The mornings became our little ritual. I woke early, sometimes deliberately, sometimes because the smell of bread drifting through the ceiling woke me before my alarm. Either way, I always found Tristan in the bakery, moving with that quiet rhythm I'd come to crave. And now, I didn't just watch, I joined him. Not just as a neighbor, not just as a tenant, but as someone who belonged in that space, someone who belonged with him. We'd start with small things, brushing flour off the counter together, tasting dough straight from the bowl, teasing each other over who made the better cinnamon roll. Our hands touched more often than not, sometimes lingering, sometimes just grazing, but always leaving sparks behind. "Stop stealing my croissants," he'd say, voice low and amused. "Not stealing," I'd reply, leaning close as I reached for the tray. "Just quality control." He'd laugh quietly, shaking his head, and I'd swear the world narrowed to that sound, that smile, that warmth. Some mornings, he'd hand me a dough scraper, flour dusting our fingers as we worked side by side, silent in the way that only comfort and attraction can be silent. Evenings upstairs were just as easy. The small apartment that once felt cramped now held a universe of private jokes, quiet touches, and whispered conversations that stretched long into the night. We'd talk about everything and nothing, recipes, old memories, city life, until the hum of the bakery below became background noise to our own rhythm. And the smells. God, the smells never stopped being intoxicating. Cinnamon, yeast, butter, and him. That faint trace of cologne, the warmth of his skin, the subtle scent of his hair, it became the smell of home. One night, after a long day of baking, he leaned against the counter in the dim light of the kitchen, eyes soft, hands brushing against mine again. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd like having a neighbor this much." I laughed, heart full. I never thought I'd like being downstairs this much. He smirked, that crooked, private smile, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. No rent, no stress, no apartments to move to. Just us, the bakery, the quiet rhythm of our lives overlapping. And I knew something I hadn't admitted before. The room above the bakery didn't just come with rent or walls. It came with Tristan. Quiet, strong, endlessly captivating Tristan. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want anything else. We were home.